Well, earlier this week, when I was on my way into the office, actually, I was listening to the radio in the car on my way to work on this message. And as I was listening to the radio, the host, one of the hosts of the show I was listening to, started talking about something in his past that he regretted doing. It was something from years earlier. Basically, the story went like this. The cable guy came to his house. He had made an appointment, but the cable guy showed up, and the cable guy offered to turn on the cable and didn't tell the company that he wasn't home. And basically he said, just give me $50 and you can have free cable. So he did it. And he had free cable for 2 years. And as he's talking about it, he's like, he felt bad about it and that kind of thing. But as everyone started talking, they commented on the cable guy's lack of character. And they also talked about the co-host's bad decision. Now, they didn't want to just throw him under the bus. They didn't give him a free pass, but they also didn't want to just publicly call out their co-host kind of thing. And so, but they were talking about it. But as I was listening to that, it's interesting because we're talking about character here. And I was listening, I was like, that's exactly what we're talking about. Character matters. Now, legendary Cowboys football coach Tom Landry once said, when we draft men for our team, we look for 5 things, and the first is character. He was asked a follow-up question: what if you find a terrific athlete who lacks character? And this is how he answered: that's easy. We don't draft him. My, how times have changed. But he said that's what's important, character. But you see this in every walk of life. You will see people with high character and people with low character and everywhere in between. And when I said you see this, I said that on purpose because you do see it. You see character by the way you live. Your character shows. It's seen in how you live, in the decisions that you make, in the plans that you make, in your actions, and in your reactions to what other people do and say, or the things that happen in your life. And our passage that we're looking at today, it highlights this idea of character as it goes back and forth between people of high character and people of low character, people of differing character. And so in these events, we see treachery and righteousness. We're beginning in chapter 3, verse 20, where we'll see that Abner is murdered. Now, you'll remember from last week, Abner is positioning himself. He realizes that David's going to be king, and he's positioning himself, but he has decided to help bring all of Israel under the rule of David as king. And so he set up this meeting with David. And let's look at that in verse 20. It says, And when Abner came with 20 men to David at Hebron, David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. And Abner said to David, I will arise and go and will gather all Israel to my lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may reign over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. And so Abner and 20 men show up to meet with David in order to make a covenant with him. And David holds a feast for them, and Abner officially agrees to give David his allegiance and to transfer power from Ishbosheth to David. Now, earlier he had made a personal agreement, but this is the official covenant that he's making with David to be their king. And we're told at the end that David sent him away, and Abner went in peace. Now, this is an important statement, because what this means is that things were good between David and Abner. They had an agreement, and David had granted him safe passage. Because you remember, Abner had been the enemy, but Abner was coming to help David, and at this point, David says, you know what, we have an agreement. You can go in peace. In other words, you don't have to worry about anything. And that was true. It meant he had nothing to worry about on his travel back through David's territory into his own home. And that was true, at least from David. Look what happens, verse 22. Just then the servants of David arrived with Joab from a raid, bringing much spoil with them. But Abner was not with David at Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he had gone in peace. When Joab and all the army that was with him came, it was told Joab, Abner the son of Ner came to the king, and he has let him go, and he has gone in peace. Then Joab went to the king and said, What have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why is it that you have sent him away so that he is gone? You know that Abner the son of Ner came to deceive you and to know you're going out and you're coming in and to know all that you are doing. And so just after Abner leaves, and our author reiterates the fact that he had left in peace, he had gone in peace, but right after he leaves, Joab and the army show up. And Joab hears, Abner's been here, and the king let him go. And Joab just can't believe this. Why would he do this? You see, it's both surprising to him and unacceptable to him. Why? Well, if you remember, Abner was their enemy. He was the leader of their enemies. He was a relative of Saul. He is the one who set up the rival king in Israel. He was the leader of Israel's military, and he had fought against many battles against David and his men and Joab. And he even tried to bring David's rule to an end. So as far as Joab is concerned, they should not be making covenants with Abner. They should not be being friendly with Abner. But also, from Joab's perspective, this would have been a perfect opportunity to get the upper hand. Because you could have arrested or killed the leader of the opposition. But what did David do? He trusted him. David trusted Abner and let him go. Now Joab insists that David has been tricked because Abner is lying to him. You see, Joab thinks and tells David what he's really done is he's come to do recon. He's doing reconnaissance. He's finding out where you're weak and what time you go in, what time you come out. He's looking to find out when and where would be the best place and time to attack you. You see, Joab really doesn't trust Abner. But I also wonder if there might be something more to this. Is it more than just a concern for David's safety? Is Joab perhaps afraid that Abner may replace him? Or at least become a co-general with him? Is he afraid that he will no longer be the leader of David's military? You see, Abner may be a different kind of threat to Joab. But Joab doesn't appear to wait for David to respond to him. At least it's not recorded for us. He just simply reprimands the king and goes. Look at verse 26. When Joab came out from David's presence, he sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the cistern of Sirah. But David did not know about it. And when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into the midst of the gate to speak with him privately. And there he struck him in the stomach, so that he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. And so Joab leaves David and immediately sends messengers out to bring Abner back. Now, it's ironic because he doesn't tell David who is actually deceiving David. Was it Abner or is it Joab? It's Joab. So Abner gets back to the town, the same town where David is, but David does not know he's there. And Joab says, come here, I need to tell you something in secret. And he pulls him off to the side, and when he's got him there all alone, he pulls him in close and stabs him in the stomach and kills him. Now we're told that his reason for doing that was he was avenging his brother. But here's the thing. His brother, Asahel, was killed during battle. That means that Joab really has no legitimate or legal right or no legitimate grounds on which to seek vengeance for his brother's death. He's really just murdering Abner. So he kills him there. Abner is totally unsuspecting of this. It's like he trusts him. He comes into that place and comes in close. Why? Because David has sent him away in peace. And so he totally trusts him. He had this agreement with David. He'd been sent off with peace, and he walks right into a trap and doesn't expect a thing, doesn't even think about it. And he's killed. Now look at David's response, verse 28. Afterward, when David heard of it, he said, I and my kingdom are forever guiltless before the Lord, for the blood of Abner the son of Ner. May it fall upon the head of Joab and upon all his father's house, and may the house of Joab never be without one who has a discharge, or who is leprous, or who holds a spindle or a staff or a cane, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. So Joab and Abishai his brother killed Abner because he had put their brother Asahel to death in the battle at Gibeon. And so it's clear here that David did not know about what was happening. But later he was told. And as soon as he hears it, as soon as he hears what Joab does, he makes a public statement of his innocence. He's saying, I was not involved in this. Now people might assume that he was, because Joab was the commander of whose army? David's. Who's the king? David. And so people might assume that David told him to do it, even if he says, I wasn't doing it, that David put him up to it. But David makes this public declaration immediately after he hears about it. I was not involved. In fact, he says about himself that he is guiltless before the Lord. And by saying that he is guiltless before the Lord, he's actually calling God as the witness. And this is not something he would say lightly. Because basically he's saying that I'm calling God as witness. If God is your witness and God says, well, you're lying, he's basically saying, God can deal with me. And so he says, I'm guiltless before the Lord. I'm innocent. But then he immediately calls a curse or God's judgment down on Joab and his family. You see, Joab and his brother murdered Abner. And David is saying, may you get what you deserve. He uses the words, may it fall upon the head of Joab. In other words, Joab is the guilty one, and he should suffer the consequences. David basically says, may they suffer from diseases, famine, and war. But of course, David is a poet, and so he uses much more colorful language or picturesque words to express Joab's guilt and judgment. Well, let's keep reading verse 31. Then David said to Joab and to all the people who were with him, tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and mourn for Abner. And King David followed the bier. They buried Abner at Hebron, and the king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner. And all the people wept. And the king lamented for Abner, saying, should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. As one falls before the wicked, you have fallen. And all the people wept again over him. Oh, I keep reading one more verse. Then all the people came to persuade David to eat bread while it was yet day. But David swore, saying, God, do so to me and more also if I taste bread or anything else till the sun goes down. And so David calls for mourning. And it's interesting because he actually forces Joab to mourn. He says, tear your clothes, lament, mourn over Abner. And I wonder if that was humiliating for Joab. Probably so, I'm sure. But you know what? He had to do it anyways. The king told him to. Publicly, tear your clothes, mourn for Abner. See, again, David is making a public display. So there is a little bit of politicking going on here. He is letting everyone know that he was not involved, that he did not want this to happen. But it's not just for show. We're told that David actually weeps for Abner. And this is interesting because David is a warrior. He is a man. But he's also soft-hearted. He is also a caring man. And as he had wept and lamented over Saul and Jonathan, he now weeps and laments over Abner. And his lament points out that Abner was deceived and was murdered. He says, should he have died like a fool? He wasn't tied up. In other words, he trusted the man who killed him. He says this shouldn't have happened. Well, verse 36. And all the people took notice of it, and it pleased them, as everything that the king did pleased all the people. So all the people and all Israel understood that day that it had not been the king's will to put to death Abner the son of Ner. And the king said to his servants, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? And I was gentle today, though anointed king. These men, the sons of Zeruiah, are more severe than I. The Lord repay the evildoer according to his wickedness. So the people are impressed with David. They appreciate his genuine care, his genuine show of feelings. And we're told that they were basically happy with everything he does. And it becomes clear to them and to all of Israel that Abner's death was not David's doing, that he had no part in it. He did not order it. But then David again speaks well of Abner, and he's speaking now specifically to his servants, to those who are closest to him. And he tells them, I need you to realize that Israel has lost a great leader and a strong man today. And then he comments on his own situation. He says, well, in my version it says that he was gentle. It's basically the idea is that he is weak. And that's what he's expressing. The idea is he recognizes that he is weak even though he's king. He was not able, in other words, even though he's king, he wasn't able to rein in his military leaders. He wasn't able to stop them from taking this treacherous action. They acted on their own and they killed a man, and they spoiled the opportunity for a covenant that would bring David as king over all of Israel. And so at this point he calls on God to be the judge and to deal with Joab. And it's interesting that he doesn't just do it right then and there. Why doesn't David put him to death for murder? This may suggest that at this point David is not yet established enough to actually punish him directly. And so he calls on God to do it. And actually at David's death, he will call on his son Solomon to take care of Joab. Well, now we come to the next event in the series, the murder of Ishbosheth. Let's start reading in chapter 4, verse 1. It says, when Ishbosheth, Saul's son, heard that Abner had died at Hebron, his courage failed and all Israel was dismayed. Now Saul's son had two men who were captains of raiding bands. The name of the one was Baanah and the other Rechab, sons of Rimmon, a man of Benjamin from Beeroth. For Beeroth also is counted part of Benjamin. The Beerothites fled to Gittaim and have been sojourners there to this day. Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came to Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And as she fled in her haste, he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. So here we're getting a little background. Ishbosheth hears about the death of Abner, and we're told that his courage failed. Literally, his hands sank, or his hands fell. It's an idiom that pictures when someone has become discouraged or is losing hope or giving up. You know, like their hands literally fell. He has lost hope. He has given up. He is discouraged. But we're told that all of Israel is upset by this news, and that's understandable because their strong leader, remember Ishbosheth, their king, is not very strong. Their strong leader was Abner. Their strong leader and the military commander is now dead. And this leaves a power vacuum in Israel. There is no one who can stop bad people from coming in and taking over if they want to. Now, speaking of bad people, we're introduced to two of them. Their names are Baanah and Rechab. They're brothers from the tribe of Benjamin, so relatives of Saul. And under Saul, when he was king, they would go out on raids and bring back goods to the people of Israel, to Saul and the people of Israel. They had been loyal to Saul, but now they see that things are changing. They see that David is growing stronger. They see that Ishbosheth is weak, that Abner is dead, and they say, I need to change directions so that we can be in a good place. They're opportunists, much like Abner was. And so they are changing directions here. But then we're introduced to another person. His name is Mephibosheth. And he's the only other remaining descendant of Saul. And we're told that he is young and crippled. He's crippled because when they heard the news about Saul and Jonathan being killed in battle, they were getting up and fleeing to go to a more secure place, and his nurse dropped him and he broke his legs or something, and he became crippled. But they're pointing this out, that he's young and he's crippled. We're told this so that we know that he's not in a condition to take over as king. And he's not in a place where he would be able to defend Israel or the kingdom. And so he's not a threat to anyone who's trying to take over Israel. Let's keep reading in verse 5. Now the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, set out, and about the heat of the day they came to the house of Ishbosheth as he was taking his noonday rest. Now understand, in that area it gets very hot in the middle of the day. So people oftentimes will take naps in the middle of the day because you really can't go out and work or anything. So you would work in the morning, take your nap, and get up and work more in the afternoon after it's cooled off. And so this is the time of day they come into the house. Verse 6, and they came into the midst of the house as if to get wheat. So they're just being deceptive here. They're coming into the house because how do you get into the house of the king? Well, you have to have a good reason. So they come in as if to get some food, to get wheat. Under false pretenses, they come into the house and they, as if to get wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and Baanah, his brother, escape. So they sneak in there, they stab him and kill him, and they run away. Well, the next verse is going to tell us back up and tell us a little more detail. Verse 7, when they came into the house, as he lay on his bed in his bedroom, they struck him and put him to death and beheaded him. They took his head and went by the way of the Arabah all night and brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron. Now, why would they cut off his head and bring it? It just sounds gruesome to us. But they don't have pictures. How else are they going to prove that Ishbosheth is dead? That they've killed him? So they take his head to say, here he is. In verse 8 it says, and they said to him, the king, here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. The Lord has avenged my lord, the king, this day on Saul and on his offspring. And so their plan here is to kill Ishbosheth, so there's no more obstacles in the way for David. No one left from Saul's family to be in the way. So then David can just march right on in. They're trying to get on David's good side. And so, you see, because what's happened is Abner's plan had failed. He's dead. And so now we have to come up with a new way. And so these guys, being the opportunists that they were, said, hey, we know how we can do this, and we'll get on David's good side, and we can have a position in this kingdom as well. And so they think they've done David a favor, and that they will be rewarded for helping him. They obviously didn't know David very well. And they didn't know that David never considered Saul to be an enemy. And so the brothers go on to say that God has avenged David for Saul's mistreatment of him. Now, in actuality, God had already done that when Saul was put to death in battle. What they have done is just simply murder of the king. But their point that they're making here is that God has cleared the way for David to be king. There's no more men from Saul's line to stand in the way. And they expect him to be happy, but look how David responds in verse 9. Chapter 4, verse 9. But David answered Rechab and Baanah, his brother, the sons of Rimnon the Beerothite, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversity, when one told me, 'Behold, Saul is dead,' and thought he was bringing me good news, I seized him and killed him at Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more when wicked men have killed a righteous man or innocent man in his own house on his bed, shall I not now require his blood at your hand and destroy you from the earth?" And David commanded his young men, and they killed them, and cut off their hands and feet, and hanged them beside the pool at Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner at Hebron. Now, David responds to their statement about God's avenging him. And he basically says that God has actually redeemed his life out of every adversity. In other words, he's saying God has saved him. God has taken care of him. In every hard situation he's been in, that he's faced, God has been there and God has taken care of him. But when he says this, he's actually taking an oath by this God who has saved him, by this saving God. But what is the oath? The oath is that he will put these brothers to death for murdering Ishbosheth, the king, just like he did that Amalekite who came and claimed to have killed Saul. He's basically saying, as a murderer, you're going to get what you deserve. Death. He says, you're just wicked men. They were wicked men who killed an innocent man. And they did it, on top of all that, they did it in his home, in his place of security, and while he was sleeping on his bed. In other words, he was an innocent man at total peace, and they came in and killed him. And these two brothers, they will be rewarded for what they did, but it's not the reward they were hoping for or expecting. David says, "Shall I not now require his blood at your hand and destroy you from the earth?" In other words, they will be held accountable for their actions and they will be put to death. You see, they expected David to be just as opportunistic as they were. That he would be excited about this. That he would be happy about it. That David would want to win by any means possible. But David was not wicked like they were. David actually had godly character. And so we're told that the two men, these brothers, were put to death. And that their hands and feet were cut off. And that their bodies were hung up on display. Now we read that and we say, okay, I understand the death part. They murdered, they deserved the capital punishment, they were put to death. I understand that. But why did they cut off their hands and why did they hang them up on display? Well, to answer that, you have to understand their culture and part of what they were doing. First of all, their hands and feet were cut off because they used them to carry out the murder and to run away. Secondly, their bodies were hung in order to make a statement. These men have done wrong and that it was not approved of by David. Now, how else do you make a statement in those days? They didn't have a newspaper. This is kind of like the headline. These men, they killed, they murdered, and this is what they deserve. This is what they got. And so it's kind of putting up a display. What these brothers did was evil. They had been judged, they had been found guilty, and they have been sentenced. And in understanding that culture, we see that what they're doing. But it's really interesting because in Deuteronomy 21, verses 22 and 23, God talks about this in his law. He says, "And if a man has committed a crime punishable by death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, His body shall not remain all night on the tree, but you shall bury him the same day, for a hanged man is cursed by God. You shall not defile your land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance. Now let me explain what I think God is doing here. There's a couple of reasons why I think he says you don't leave him up overnight. One, he says that man is cursed. And I think there's two things going on here. One, I think God is bringing in the fact that we value human life. And so we don't mistreat and make, just let it rot there hanging. The other thing is he's saying that man is cursed, and you've got a curse hanging up in your land. And you're not going to defile your land by just leaving that cursed person hanging there. And so he says this, and he tells them that even though their culture does this, and this is the way they make these things known, he says, you don't overdo it. Well, then we're told too that they gave Ishbosheth, or at least his head, a funeral, a proper burial. Now we know God's plan is that David will be king. But as we read these verses, as we read these chapters, it seems that everyone has a different idea of how that should come about. How should we do it? How should we get him there? And it seems to be like there's quite a bit of chaos going on in Israel. And you have these people of poor character who are acting selfishly without considering right and wrong. But it's when the people see David's character and are convinced that he wasn't a part of all this treachery that they will come to him and want to make him their king, which we'll see next week. But let's talk about some life lessons that we can draw from these verses that we've looked at today. The first one is that the righteous was cursed for my treachery. We've been talking about treachery and righteousness. But the righteous one was cursed for my treachery. Now this is not directly in these passages, but we've been speaking about people being cursed and hung on a tree for treachery. And Paul alludes to this in Galatians 3:13 when he says, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who is hanged on a tree. And what Paul is talking about is how our sin broke God's law and brought God's curse upon us. You see, God created us to have a relationship with Him. God created us to live in a righteous relationship with Him. But we broke His law, we disobeyed Him, and that brought the curse upon us, meaning we were cursed. We were under judgment. We were headed for hell and judgment. But Jesus, the righteous one, the innocent one, He came and lived a sinless life. He never disobeyed God. But He was hung on a cross. He was hung on a tree. He took our sin upon Himself, and He became cursed in our place. But He became cursed because of my treachery, because of your treachery, our sin against God. And God's word says, believe in Jesus and you will be saved. Meaning, He took the punishment for you so you don't have to. If you believe in Jesus, His death takes the place of yours. The judgment that was placed on Him means you don't have to be judged. But you will be forgiven and made right with God and brought into a right relationship with Him. Jesus took the curse, the judgment for you, so you could be right with God. The righteous one was cursed for my treachery. Secondly, the end does not justify the means. Now, did you notice how the brothers who killed Ishbosheth, they saw their wicked action as bringing about God's will? They said, look, God has avenged you of Saul through us. You see, they think we're doing the work. We're getting to where God wants things to be. But see, David saw right through them. And he said, you know what? Even if they thought, well, God wants David to be king, so if we kill the current king, David can be. We're helping. David sees that what they did was wrong. They murdered an innocent man. You see, the end does not justify the means. But do we sometimes justify our sin because we think it's for a good cause, or it will somehow help us in the end? Cheating on a test. One example that just popped in my head. Oh, well, I'll get a better grade. I'll be able to get a better job. Do we justify our sin because we think it's for a good cause or will help us in the end? The end doesn't justify the means. And thirdly, the third lesson, life lesson, is your character is showing. We saw the character of Joab and of the brothers. They all thought they had a good reason for doing what they did. They all thought they had a good reason for murder, committing murder. Now, David correctly called it wicked. He said it was evil. But they were willing to do wrong. They were willing to sin in order to get ahead. On the other hand, we see David, who would have nothing to do with it. And he had the most to gain. I mean, you see this in all of these situations. David is the one who would be king. David was one that had the most to gain from this, but yet he would have nothing to do with it. Your actions reveal your character. What you do, what you say, how you respond, and that may be the biggest one. Because sometimes we think through what we're doing, but when we respond to something happens or somebody says something, we just respond intuitively. Those things show our character. Jesus said it like this in Luke 6. For no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. In other words, you grow what you are. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person, out of the good treasure of his heart, produces good. And the evil person, out of the evil treasure, produces evil. In other words, if I'm good, then I'm going to do good. If I'm evil, I'm going to do evil. What I do shows what's inside of me. And he concludes, he says, for out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. So our character is showing. What is on display in your life? What are you known for? And does it honor your God? Your character is showing. My character is showing. And I know that there are areas in life where we can all grow. And that means we need to draw near to God. We need to seek Him. We need to submit to Him. And He will make us more and more like Jesus. May the character of Jesus be seen in you and in me.